I've never done whole parts.
I'm willing to take little tiny pieces. There won't even be a scar.
I think I found the problem.
Oh, come on, you're the doctor.
Everyone, lights out and quiet.
Who's here? Sexy young Pacino's here. Roy Schneider's here. The podcast is here.
We're here. Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Media Morgue, where movies come to be examined. I am your host, all of the cool leather jackets in cruising, joined by my fellow soldiers of cinema.
I am a box of nitroglycerin.
And I am Al Pacino kicking open that guy's door and choking
and then leaving.
I'm that guy that Al Pacino gets fucking horribly interrogated and
gets slapped
around
big
by a big naked man with a jockstrap.
Who is that guy?
Who is that guy?
I like when Al Pacino goes over, takes his hat, and throws it out of the open window. He definitely just improv. They were like, Al.
Yeah, that's a very Pacino move.
Because then he has it back
Al, we need
on
that hat.
after that when he goes to smack the other dude. So I think it was like a continuity thing. He just decided to throw his hat off. But yes, we are here to continue discussing, as we said in our last episode, the legacy of the late, great William Friedkin with two films that Dan picked today. One of them is Sorcerer, 1977. The other is Cruising, 1980. So we'll be breaking those down later. But of course, before the reviews, we have the news. And what a newsworthy week it has been, past couple weeks. I guess the big thing is that finally SAG AFTRA has made a deal with the producers and studios after a grueling,
and this is recent as of like 3 days ago, right?
118 days on strike. They were the last after the double strike that they were on with the writers, with the WGA. They were holding out for a bit more provisions, and they finally had, I guess, most of them met. And then it went to the national board, the union's national board, for approval on Friday, and I do believe that they approved it. So this is a big deal. It's a sigh of relief for a lot of people.
Yeah, this was about when they suspected that this would come to a close, though, because I remember hearing that everyone was saying like late November was when they expected the deal to be struck, and this is early by just like a hair, just by like 2 weeks or so. But I mean, that's good news for all parties involved. Do we know the exact permutations of the deal they struck?
Now, there's some stuff I'm looking at on the actual SAG AFTRA website right now. So this says the deal provides meaningful protections around the use of artificial intelligence, including informed consent and compensation for the creation and use of digital replicas of our members, living and deceased, whether created on set or licensed for use. The agreement includes an unprecedented wage pattern, with 2 wage increases in the first year of the contract, 7% upon ratification, and another 4% increase effective July 2024, making a compounded first-year increase of 11.28. There will be another 3.5 increase effective July 2025. It breaks the so-called industry pattern. Yeah. Wages for background actors have gone up.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's
which
good.
Is really cool.
Of course.
And in a monumental breakthrough, for the first time ever, the number of covered positions in the West Coast zones will equal those of the East Coast zones. This is projected to add almost 11,000 new covered background work days annually. So a lot of it has to do with pay. A lot of it has to do with benefits. Just
there was some weird holdup for a while with AI.
There was. The
AI stuff was like supposed to be the final thing that the studios wouldn't really kneel on. I guess they were under the impression that like actors didn't truly get like what they could do. I think there was a precedent sent by Scarlett Johansson like just recently, like taking out a lawsuit for some like use of her likeness that was kind of in conversation with the AI stuff. I don't know what the exact thing is that they decided on, but the AI shit is very interesting. AI has been more in conversation this year than probably ever before. It's a good thing that they had the foresight to kind of jump on AI and the use of their likenesses.
Well, it's probably because there's been a lot of flagrant AI usage from Disney, but probably from other
Disney
studios. Yeah. I mean,
Disney kind of shamelessly.
Well, I mean, I think we might look back at the last 10 years of recreating Peter Cushing for Rogue One
Mm-hmm.
and be like, wow, that was like kind of crazy that guy is dead.
Mhm.
And like we created a new performance for him, or we might be like, that was the canary in the coal mine and it's all over now. But I mean, obviously very happy the actors get to go back to work. I think, there is for actors that are just kind of getting in, acting is kind of a blue collar gig for most people.
Mhm.
So really hope that we get to see some new faces in the next year or two. There's some actors that broke out this year. Sophia Wilde from Talk to Me was great.
Mhm.
Just fantastic.
Hartnett has made a comeback this year. There's actors that like really delivered this year, and I hope, obviously Lily Gladstone, that I hope with the end of the strike we start to see them in more things.
I would agree. I think a big part of it is also just obviously people from the outside and even from the inside look at like the A-list actors who make tens of millions on these projects, and they say, well, how can acting be like a hard? It's not a real job, like whatever. But I think the goal would be that whatever you choose to do, whatever trade you ply in life, you can make a living. Which doesn't mean that you have to like have 10 houses in the Hamptons, but it means that like you can support yourself and your family. So I think even if it's bringing this to the level, like we don't know exact figures in terms of salary or what it's going to look like, but it should at least be that like, even if you are just a daily on a television show, you don't also have to like do nights at a bar just to like make your rent, like there should be some way that we can, I think, spread the resources to make things more equitable.
This was, I guess, going back to the AI thing, but do you guys see that Disney had like procedurally generated like a crowd of
I did see that.
high schoolers?
I wonder if that was based on likenesses, or because I know I had heard from
It wasn't.
someone. No,
They
because
looked like Sims.
Well, the tech isn't, but I know people who did background for Spider-Man Homecoming, and they said that they like some of them signed waivers that were like, yes, you can continue to use our likenesses. So Disney has probably thousands of faces in their database
that they can just pull.
They looked like PS1 like graphics. Though. Like it seemed like the technology was like learning like as it was procedurally generating them. Like one of the students is like clapping and like the hands like aren't really
connected,
like lining up.
It's like a weird.
Yeah, it seems like the tech is like learning like as it's on.
Do it live, I guess. So yeah, this is like we said, it's a big deal. I know that there were also a lot of other even like bigger shows like podcasts or YouTube shows or whatever that had also halted talking about things until the strike was over. So that's cool that they're back. But it doesn't mean that that the ship is entirely righted. A few weeks ago, we got a Variety hit piece on Marvel, written by Tatiana Siegel, and I have it pulled up here. But we definitely chatted a lot about this in our group chat. Wes, do you want to take point on this because you've also read the book?
Yeah. So I read the book, The Reign of the MCU, which was written by Joanna Robinson and some of her colleagues, and I'm a big fan of hers. And Marvel is in an odd place. I think, for about 10 to 12 years, Marvel was kind of the Wendy's or McDonald's of Hollywood in a good way, where it was like, I know what to expect. Sometimes I'll get something that's really great.
Mm-hmm.
Most times I'll get something that will fill me up and I'll go home happy. You know what I mean? And they, occasionally you'd get a Black Panther or a Ragnarok or an Iron Man 3 or, one of those. And you'd be like, wow, what a great piece of action filmmaking. And then other times you'd be like, this is pretty solid. And it seems as if since Endgame, the wheels have more or less fallen off the car. In part because of Iger's leaving and then returning to Disney, but being gone for about 2 years. And in the mandate of the studio being produce more. So we've seen kind of an influx of a bunch of projects that, at best the VFX has been kind of shoddy, and at worst they seem a little undercooked. We've talked about some of them. At worst,
it's Ant-Man, Quantumania.
well, I mean, but I think there is there's a lot of interesting stuff in the article. The Blade stuff is, Justin went and walked into the ocean. After that stuff, but
there's a lot of frustrating things to, and how much of it is entirely verified, how much of it is exaggerated. There people have been splitting hairs about it. I know there was some commentary about the recent release of the Marvels with Nia DaCosta, and there was they really made a point of saying, oh, she wasn't even on the project when they were in post-production,
which she later denied.
Which she clarified.
She did.
Yeah, which was like the post-production kept getting pushed.
Right. The whole production, actually, the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, she's doing.
She kept putting off her prior engagements, and then it got to a point where she was like, "I have to move on."
She's doing Hedda with Tessa Thompson, an adaptation of Hedda Gabler in London. And that's a really important project to her, apparently. And obviously, you do Marvel stuff. She's a big X-Men fan, so I'm sure you do it because you like those characters. But also, it's like you do it so that you can get money from other studios for your stuff.
Yeah.
So she does the Marvels, which also I think it's fair to. I think we should mention that I think Nia DaCosta is getting a lot of. And Justin and I haven't seen this movie yet, but I think Nia DaCosta is getting a lot of heat. Is bearing a lot of the responsibility for something that's clearly like an error in the machine. It's like it's not Nia DaCosta's sole fault that the Marvels is underperforming. It's clearly there's an issue with the studio. You know what I mean? So
I want to talk about that Blade stuff though. That's crazy. Can you imagine being Mahershala Ali and being behind this project for 6 years now, and then having to read a draft of that script where you're the third or fourth fiddle to 3 other people? Wasn't that the story?
It was something
that they couldn't figure out how to make Blade the lead
in the movie called Blade. I don't get it. I mean, I think there was a formula that Marvel had early, and to talk specifically about casting, where they really weren't going after known names. Like people wanted Brad Pitt for Thor. They didn't do that. People wanted, they
would make the star.
Yeah, they would find someone who had kind of been in a few things but never really caught on, and then they would use this as a vehicle to either create or rehabilitate, in the case of Robert Downey Jr., their image. But now, as Marvel has aged and with it brought back the age of major franchise blockbuster stuff, other artists and actors have had other opportunities to make their name elsewhere. So now when you bring in people, by the time they brought in Benedict Cumberbatch to play Doctor Strange, it was okay, well, he's already been a pop cultural mainstream star. And that was, I remember, a turning
because they make
point.
the announcements for one thing 4 years ahead of time, and then the movie didn't they announce Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange when you and me were in high school?
I think it was
Justin,
floating at the very
when
least.
we were in college?
I mean,
because it was Joaquin, Ethan Hawke, and Benedict Cumberbatch were in contention. I think. And then one of them,
and so they finally got that.
But I also, Justin, find it interesting with what you're saying is Blade feels like a slam dunk. It feels like that's if anything is going to save a waning, not waning. I mean, they're making millions of dollars, but if anything is going to save a brand that feels like the stock is kind of going down, I feel
and feels really safe.
Yeah, making an R-rated vampire movie
with the second R-rated one.
Yeah, with a property that you've known for 25 years works.
Yeah,
people will go see a Blade movie.
Definitely.
And you know what it also is it's I think there was blood in the water when they couldn't nail down a Fantastic Four cast, when people kept dropping.
Yeah.
And it's the Fantastic Four. What you're playing the Reed Richards. This is a bear, you know what I mean? And they couldn't get someone to do it,
you heard the new news with that, right? With
it's
Fantastic Four.
The Always Sunny guy is basing
it's
his
a director
on it.
who did. Yeah, it goes on Always Sunny.
I mean, the director, the stuff that he's pulling.
I need to know what episodes he did.
The stuff he's pulling. He said the Always Sunny thing, and then in the same interview, he was like, the runs he's looking at are Kirby and Lee, Byrne, Jonathan Hickman, and I'm like, well, those are great. If you do that, then you'll have a great movie.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. I heard that he was trying to go for a 60s aesthetic. They were trying to go for something that was really Kirby.
I think the most recent rumor is that what they're going to do is they're going to start setting up X-Men and Fantastic Four in pocket universes, and then Secret War will bring them all together.
And then they'll reboot probably from scratch.
Yeah. which, like, whatever. Sure.
Why not?
You know?
So his name is Matt
Shackman.
Shackman,
Yeah.
and I'm looking
He
here.
directed like 70 something episodes.
Big
I
TV
think, of that
director.
show.
Yeah, big TV director. Okay, he did 43 episodes.
I
of
was
Always
wrong.
Sunny in Philadelphia.
Hey.
Starting in season
Yeah.
3. The gang dances their asses off. Max banging the waitress.
Yeah.
Sweet D is a heart attack. The gang cracks the Liberty Bell. That's a great
Mhm.
episode. The Nightman Cometh. Oh my God, he did
some of the iconic ones
musical
then.
episode. That's fucking awesome. That's so cool. The gang gets a new member. Mac's mom burns her house down. Season 7. Antisocial Network. How Mac Got Fat. Thunder Gun Express. One of the all-time great episodes. Seasons 8, 10, and 12. Okay, so yeah, he's been on Always Sunny like
He's done a
more than 10
lot.
years.
Pretty consistently.
Oh,
Yeah, more than 10 years.
He did Justin, he did the episode of Succession in season 2 where they find out about the cruise, where they're checking the phone the whole time. Yeah, that's him.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know.
Is that where Jeremy Strong gets like taken hostage?
No, that although
Emotionally hostage.
he would never do it. But Jeremy Strong as Reed Richards is really good.
It's not bad.
Just saying.
It's not bad.
He would never do
Not
it.
as good as Glenn Howard.
Maybe not.
Well, you know, my thought is like, guys, if you can't get Adam Driver, why not just cast Glenn Howerton?
Yeah,
Like,
he's there.
You've already worked.
I don't know how much yelling
He's there.
he'll get to do as Reed
Glenn
Richards.
Howerton's on the uptick right now, man. From Blackberry, he's like on top right now. Everybody
He's
wants
very
to
good in Blackberry.
Very
But
good.
also for that reason, even though he looks
That's probably my best supporting actor pick for this.
he looks a lot like
Not to
Reed.
cut you off,
no
Justin.
problem. But I
does.
also think what he's acted in so far leans more Victor Von Doom because of the arch rage.
Sure.
But it would be interesting to see, especially because Reed Richards can be, obviously he can lean egomaniacal as well.
He's become untethered and
Knows
his
no
rage
bounds.
knows no bounds.
So yeah, we'll see. I mean, that is an announcement that is pending. But one announcement that seems to have been confirmed finally after a 10-year wait, Dan ran to his rooftop and stripped naked in the rain. GTA 6.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you guys remember the year 2013 when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out and how that was like, maybe this was just my experience, but that was like all anybody could talk about.
I remember it was big.
Like I remember that was when I went to a new high school, and it was like you heard it in the hallways, you heard like teachers talking about it. It was just like everybody was just talking about GTA 5 and like counting down the days until GTA 5. It was like the next like evolution, and it was gonna kind of spike the ball, as it were, and like nothing was gonna be the same moving forward. And that game came out, and I remember like I bought a PS3 just to play it, and like I would have like friends come over and we would just play GTA 5 for hours on end. Like the week and the month that came out, that was like life pretty much. And I remember the speculation was that like GTA 6 was going to drop somewhere around the end of the PS4 life cycle, which I guess ended officially like 3 years ago, right? Something like that.
Probably. What was the last big game
say?
for it?
Probably The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. And like fans kind of like obsessively have just done this whole thing where they'll look at like every single thing that Rockstar puts out and they'll be like, the moon phase and this screen cap is a waning gibbous, which must mean that the announcement is like 4 months out or something like that. I mean, the whole game leaked before there was an official announcement, and what we saw was like beta footage. I think that must have been like 3 or 4 years old, like at the time that it was leaked. So who knows what the game looks like now? But I guess I should say they confirmed that a trailer will be releasing in early December. Probably that means at the Game Awards when they do Game of the Year and stuff. Because there was no need to like bother like formally announcing the game. I guess like those leakers are the ones who like announced it. So they were like, y'all know what the fuck it is. Like the game's coming out, trailer's coming out in December. Like, be there. And I'm sure that trailer is going to close with like it's going to be live, so everyone's going to be like, yeah, and then it's going to close with 2025 or 2026, and everyone's gonna go, fuck.
2028.
Do you think, Dan? I think about this when it comes to video games. I feel like even more than films or any other kind of visual medium, and maybe even more than like albums, video games seem very. Video game fans rather seem very seem to want sequels more often than like consumers of any other thing. Like it feels like people are less because of how quickly video game technology advances, you always want to see the freshest, cleanest iteration of the game. Whereas with movies, it's like, I got 3 of these, I don't need to see a 4th. But it's like,
whereas gamers are like happy about like a remake getting announced.
Oh yeah,
and
exactly.
That's probably the only medium we'll get super excited for a remake.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to me because I think, do you think that there's a world where people would have been satisfied with 5 being the last Grand Theft Auto? Or, it's hard to say, I guess. But.
I don't know, man. I mean, 5 is a pretty narratively compelling story. I always really loved the story in that game, and the 3 protagonists. It was very inspired by like Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
And kind of the resurgence and like television is like
it's very
a medium
TV.
with like artistic merit and stuff.
Yeah, it's very prestige TV.
I don't know. It's like I played GTA Online for years, and like knowing that they had all this technology like cooking for Red Dead Redemption 2, it was like, man, like this already feels old hat 5 years in, and like we didn't know it at the time, but we would have to wait like at least another 5 years. I mean, probably it's going to go on 8 for the new game, and they have all this tech. I mean, Rockstar has like all this cutting edge shit that like they've patented and no one else has access to. There was some news story about like some company tried to buy their AI that they designed like for traffic in like their games in order to like teach like self-driving cars or something like that.
Really?
and like Rockstar's patents was like what they were going after. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that.
That's interesting.
That was a couple of years ago, yeah. But really, it's just I'm really excited for a new Rockstar game. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 is 5 years old, which makes me feel insane because that game still feels brand new.
Yeah, still edits on TikTok for Red Dead Redemption 2.
Absolutely, man.
It's. I mean, I think it's so funny what you guys are saying about. I played GTA 5 all through the pandemic with my dad. Like it was the only thing that was keeping us sane. And it's just odd that, not odd, but it's just such a difference in between movies and video games. Is like, it's expected to wait for a video game. You can wait a decade for a video game and you're like, that's, but for a movie, we're getting a Megan 2 in like a year, you know what I mean? Like when we're just, that's expected.
There's some precedent for that. Like I feel like Activision franchises are like really big. Or I mean, oh my God, the big news story this week from that was Call of Duty. The new Call of Duty was developed in 16 months.
Yeah.
Their turnaround time is 16 months, and normally they get 3 years to work on those games, and like those games come out rushed as it is. And it's like imagine less than half of that development time.
Assassin's Creed they've been putting out 2 games a year for like the past 6 years too, right? With Ubisoft.
And like Odyssey, it was just full of like grinding.
Yeah.
All these things behind like paywalls.
Yeah, there's definitely a conversation that has been had about how video games are increasingly expensive, but release increasingly incomplete.
Right.
And there's sort of there's almost a reliance on the fan base and the player base to tell the developers what's wrong with the game after it's come out, rather than them testing it thoroughly beforehand.
Yeah.
And so then you get into a cycle of updates and patches and all that.
And that can really affect a game's reputation. Like Cyberpunk's reputation is still affected by that. And, and that game, like I played it all the way through when it came out, when it was buggy, and I thought it was pretty much a 9 out of 10. Like I loved that game when it came out, but like even like now they've completely done this new like swath of upgrades to the game, and it's like perfect, but like you still see like the pushback from it coming out in like a state that was like nearly unplayable, not quite. I feel like the devs that have really squeaky clean reputations are like the guys who release stuff when it's like good and ready. I'm talking about like the Naughty Dogs and the Rockstars and stuff. Definitely not the Pokemon developers. They release unfinished games like every year.
So it goes.
Yeah. So
You
it
gotta
goes. So it goes
you
is
gotta
right. I'm excited
respect-
for December, man.
Yeah, man, I'm happy for you. I'm happy for all
It's gonna
the
be cool.
all the auto fans. But I guess
And
that'll
Justin, that's not quite your cup of tea.
You don't like
just,
robbing. You don't like robbing people and ending up.
You know what it is?
Only robbing and stealing.
It's so funny because I've had that game. I've had experiences with that game in the past, but all like my parents, specifically my dad, has always been like morally opposed to it. But then my dad loves Red Dead Redemption, which is like
which
the
is
same
essentially
kind of game. But I think because it's like there's a removal, it's
in the
a period
Wild
piece,
West,
so it feels a bit more detached.
Well, it's a journey through American history. It's not
Exactly.
just blowing people's kneecaps off.
Not only that, hog tying clan members and throwing them to alligators.
God, that game was so good, dude.
Yeah.
It was so good.
My favorite genre of TikTok video is people modding GTA 5 and like just like modding it so that it's like Spider-Man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Spider-Man is like gunning down Rick and Morty.
It's like unrecognizable.
Someone
As GTA.
modded it so that it was the Franklin character model, but like moved like the PS4 Spider-Man. So he's like web slinging, but it's still Franklin.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I mean, just imagine when they release the source code for GTA 6 and the mods for that. That's gonna be like the next 20 years of entertainment. Just what they're gonna do in that new Rage engine, you know?
Yeah.
It's gonna be like someone's gonna make an invincible game inside of GTA 6, you know?
Isn't cruising kind of like Grand Theft Auto? Because you know they're
A little, if you really squint.
If you squint, why
a
not?
segue.
Why not? We'll take our first break and then come back to talk about Billy Friedkin's Cruising.
You can bone my wife, sleep in my house, but you cannot watch my television
set.
Not listen to my podcast.
So good.
Oh shit!
Give me all you got. Give me all you got. Give me all you got.
Welcome back, folks.
Oh my god.
Oh man, Pacino's so good, man. Even when Pacino is bad,
Yes.
Pacino's the best, dude. Like, come on.
Well, I think like following this movie, because right after this he does Scarface, and like Scarface is pretty much how he acts for like the remainder of his career. You know,
Danny, I need you to look at my username because I was. Thank you for giving me the end. Pacino has been replaced, and I think we got to talk about it. I think after Cruising, he becomes a fundamentally different actor.
Yeah, he does, which is interesting because the movie is about a guy taking on a role, right, and then like it changing him irrevocably after the fact.
There you go. It's funny because the Godfather is what like really puts him on the map, but you don't. I guess you don't think of the Godfather as like a Pacino vehicle
Per se,
right?
more part two.
You think of
Two.
but you think of like Scarface, like you think of Scarface, and like the first thing you think of is Pacino.
You also with the Godfather, you like watching the Godfather, and then even watching this, you can kind of see like him starting to shed like who he was, like the kind of actor persona he is, because in Godfather, it's like he does Panic at Needle Park. He gets Godfather.
Great movie. Panic at Needle Park is fucking great.
The producers are ready to fire this guy. He does Godfather. They have to move the shooting of the cops up the schedule so that the producers can see that he's a good actor. And he's like nervous the whole time. He like ends that scene, goes outside to do the rest of it, breaks his ankle, is convinced he's going to get fired.
Yeah.
So like the whole Godfather is like racked with him being like, am I going to become Al Pacino? And then he does two, and it's a star vehicle. And then he becomes like Big Al, and he becomes like
Big Al,
like Tony,
Big Al on campus.
Well, Dan, you selected these two movies, so I was interested.
Okay.
So just talk a bit about.
This is where we should.
Yeah. Why?
So William Friedkin, man, one of the great iconic directors of New Hollywood, whose career was kind of defined by experimentation, early on and later on, and he begins with the Sonny and Cher movie, which is kind of like made for TV, and that's like his Oh my god! But he does. Okay, so hold on. He does a lot of television actually. He does the Alfred Hitchcock Hour in 1965. But the Boys in the Band, the first big movie, and then he follows that up with French Connection, which is
Big
like
deal.
another home run, and The Exorcist right after.
Right. Previous
So
episode.
that's a great little 3-movie run to kind of establish yourself with. And his follow-up to The Exorcist is, of course, Sorcerer. But we're talking about two movies ahead of that. Cruising, the queer thriller from 1980, starring, of course, Al Pacino as a police detective who goes undercover in the underground S&M community to lure out and ensnare a killer. It's got some little giallo flourishes. It's got some absurdist comedy here and there, but it's
Bit of a slasher for
bit
a second.
of a crime thriller, and at some points, bit of a police procedural. And it's just one of these movies that I feel like really hooks you early on.
Yes.
And I turned it off a little bit early last night. I just had to get to bed, and I was just thinking, I was like, man, I'm laying awake right now. I could be finishing Cruising, because I love this movie. I saw this in theaters a little over a year ago, and I was just blown. I didn't even know it was a Friedkin movie. I just had heard that it was this, this queer thriller with Al Pacino that has this big cult following, and kind of blew me away. And then the credits rolled, and I was like, oh shit, Friedkin!
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Which weird because it starts with William Friedkin's Cruising at the beginning. But God, this I mean, I don't really know if you guys are as hot on this one as I am, but this is got to be one of my favorite, one of the most underrated movies of the 80s for me.
I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it felt like a slasher film, which but even more than that, it reminded me a lot of Fincher, and it reminded me a lot of what Fincher would go on to do, which is Seven, Zodiac, even Gone Girl, these kind of
as well,
these pseudo slasher thrillers, procedural things.
And the
I don't know.
killer
I think
is a giallo killer. The way he speaks in these hushed whispers and the crinkling of his leather getup and stuff. It's such an idiosyncratic sound design.
I want to talk about the killer a little later because I think what the movie does with the killer or killers is really interesting. But yeah, I think the sound mixing on the killer, even when he's the difference between when he's talking to other people and then when he's in killer mode, the sound design is a little bit different.
There's a bit early on when he's talking to this one guy in the S&M club, and that guy is yelling to yell over the music and stuff. And then when the killer talks, and it's clearly ADR, but that's what adds to the uncanniness of it. He's speaking in a hushed whisper, but his hushed whisper is just bassy and loud enough to penetrate the guy who's yelling to kind of to get himself across. The levels to that were great.
I think one thing I wanted to do with you guys is make a Mount Rushmore for Al Pacino playing cops, because I don't know. I think Al Pacino gets a lot of shit today. We were just doing him from Heat, because he does kind of go for the cheap seats now. I think is kind of what he's.
But
known
everyone
for. But
loves
I think,
Al, right?
But well, yeah. I mean, but I think there is this is kind of him mid metamorphosis where he's still kind of the unassuming everyman actor guy. Yeah. And I really, really like what the movie does with him. I like that he's kind of unknowable, that the way Friedkin shoots, I think I said this in my Letterboxd review. I think a lot of the people who talk about Cruising talk about the club scenes and how well those are shot. Yeah. But I think the thing that really surprised me was how Friedkin shoots him when he's with his girlfriend and how sterile it is. And
especially when they break up. And it's it doesn't even seem like he's attracted to her anymore.
We barely get close-ups on Pacino in those scenes. It's like a Sears commercial.
Yeah.
And it's it's so clear that Pacino is just not even there. Mentally is not even with her anymore. And I thought that was really, I don't know. I think Friedkin's camera is unlike anyone else in the new Hollywood. He's so good at blending documentary and film with this kind of pseudo noir thing. And he does it in The Exorcist, where you go between these long lens shots of following people to Reagan in the room, and it's dark and it's but yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
I feel like it would have been so great to be able to make these movies like in the 70s and the 80s. You know what I mean? Like he's definitely helped by the time where he's making movies, because there was nothing like that like 70s New York and that 80s New York, like for different reasons. But like, you know, I love New York movies, and I love how like they're always such a time capsule to like the phases that the city goes through. And this just watching this, it's like, even if it wasn't like a masterfully made psychological thriller, you see all this footage of like the gays hanging out in Central Park and just kind of like sitting on the slopes, and like got that like underground like club scene. Like it looks like a different like world. I don't know. He's really helped by like the time that he's making this movie, I think.
Yeah, of course. It's very specific, and that's part of why it works. I also enjoyed this movie. I actually thought when I started watching it, because I watched Sorcerer first, I actually thought that I was gonna like Cruising more, and then just by the end, I think it came in just a hair under. And we'll talk a bit about that, but I love a police procedural. I love a detective story. That's just part of what I'm interested in.
Very much like
it's a little bit curious too. So I was feeling it, and I liked this, the scheme of like getting this guy undercover. And I also felt that there was a bit more, and this is intentional, I think, there's a bit more understanding of who Steve, whatever his real name is, / John, whatever his fake name is, John Forbes. Yeah. There's a bit more investigation into who he is as a character, whereas in Sorcerer, it's like 4 men on the run. But so that kind of helped graft me to the story. There are some things that I thought could have been a little more fleshed out in terms of seeing him maybe outside of his work. And I maybe did want to see a bit more of his relationship with Marion. I saw her face in the movie. I couldn't realize where I knew her from. Marion from Indiana Jones.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, that's her.
Who so unfortunately was also in this year's indie installment.
Oh well, what are you gonna do?
What can you do?
But hey, I like it, and I think
you need to pay your light bill.
you gotta, even if it's for one scene, and you show up and say, "Oh, Wendy."
$750,000, maybe a lot more. I'm sure. But I too really appreciated the old New York photography. I think New York is one of the most cinematic locations, and maybe that's just because it's the one that I've seen the most of. But I think just it agrees with film, and I think it's well performed. You get Paul Sorvino in here, by the way, with an incredibly like understated but cool, like weathered detective performance. So I really liked him.
I love the cops in this movie, and I'll never say that again.
Oh my god,
I don't like cops in real life.
Joe Spinell, have you seen Maniac? Where
No.
Joe Spinell plays this serial killer in the city who's it's one of those serial killer things where they're like obsessed with their mother. There's like a million of those, but like he is like pursuing women at night who are like sex workers and things like that, and he's scalping them and like bringing their scalps back to his apartment and like putting their scalps on like these mannequins and he keeps in his apartment.
This is the one that
movies of the 80s.
Elijah Wood remade, right?
Yeah, there was a remake with Elijah Wood. Yeah, there's a really famous scene where Tom Savini from Dawn of the Dead like gets his head blown off, and it's like a very great, like Joe Spinell jumps in the hood of a car and uses a shotgun and blows off Tom Savini's head, and it's like shot in slow motion, and it's like the Scanner's head explosion. But anyways, that's like mainly where I know him from, but he's in like The Godfather.
He's in Rocky.
He is. He's in Taxi Driver. He's in Taxi Driver. He's in Taxi Driver.
Anytime I see him show up in a movie from this, like he's in 2 movies with Pacino. He plays that corrupt cop who makes the 2 cross-dressers. Like he basically sexually assaults the 2 cross-dressers. Yeah. He's fucking great in this too, man. It's such a creepy movie.
It is
all around.
Well, yeah. It's like and also it's especially creepy because it's where Justin and I live. So it's like every once in a while,
see a place.
Pacino will like walk to Dodge Hall where I went to film school, and I'll be like,
I noticed that.
No, I really it is such a creepy movie. I don't know if there's any. I guess Fritz Lang's M kind of founds the detective movie as horror movie thing. But it feels like it really like calcifies what Fincher and also what Kurosawa does in Cure, like the idea that like the detective like descends into the underworld and it gets darker and darker as we go on, you know.
Yeah, the kind of all the stuff with like his dad and like the voice of like his father coming through him and stuff.
Dude,
it's also like the rest of the movie is very like not by the numbers, but it's like we're gonna, you know, like catch this guy, and but then like you get to it, and it's this like kind of confounding like reveal and like psychology of like what's going on in this student's like mind. What did you guys think of that third act there with him?
So the killer is interesting. I didn't necessarily expect the reveal to play out the way it did. With us, where we spend like some individual time with him, but they almost do. I mean, it's Psycho in a way. Like it's you know, there's this sort of bifurcation in his personality where he can just be the musical theater student by day, and then at night, for you know, whatever reasons, he feels compelled to do these murders. I think it wasn't that I necessarily I don't necessarily going into a movie need to understand a killer's motivation, but I did think that the movie was teeing that up. So when I didn't get it per se, I felt a little bit underwhelmed by, like, I knew who he was, and then because of that, I expected to find out more about why he does what he does.
Well, it's also so abstract, right?
Yeah,
like the whole reveal. That's what I was kind of trying to angle for there.
Yeah, the revelation of him, and then like the letters that he's writing to his dead father, and going to see him on the park bench, and you know, I mean, I guess what I inferred, and this doesn't necessarily have to be the answer in order for me to take value from the movie or the performance, but maybe I thought there was some kind of like abuse perpetrated onto him by his father that then caused him to grow up hating himself, and whether that was sexual abuse or physical abuse or both. And then perpetuate that abuse on other people, especially because in the first murder, there's like a quick flash of like anal sex that's happening as he's stabbing the guy. And I didn't know if it was a thing of like, this is a sexual thing for the killer,
the dual
or if
penetration,
or if he was flashing back to something that has happened to him. And in either case, I think, just to answer your question, when the revelation of the killer came, I was also expecting a more comprehensive revelation of his motivation. Or an understanding.
You made me do this.
You made me do this.
You made me do this.
But I still think that his aura was incredible, and I think like Wes said, they are a very effective sort of boogeyman throughout the film.
I was just gonna say it's. I guess this speaks to the film's pacing, but how we keep going from these like large swaths of like spending time with Pacino, a little bit of time with the detectives, and then going and spending time with the killer when he's like out and he's like on the prowl, and he's so kind of foreboding, you know, and like his whole kind of presence is so like he just seems so abstract. I don't know. It's like when we're following him in the park at night, and it's getting darker and darker the more they enter like the heart of the park, and then they're like entering the brush. It just that is the most like fight or flight like moment, like probably in the entire movie. You know, him in the porn theater, and like the way he's shot there, and especially when he's like killing these people, it's like there's so much like style to it, you know. It's like when the porno is being projected on the wall and you see the silhouette of the hand coming up with the knife. It's like all this really like classic horror movie stuff. It's a very like in its finest moments, it's like really scary in a way that like tracks that like this is the director of The Exorcist.
Yes,
you know, like it definitely feels like what I always thought of as like Friedkin in aesthetic.
There are moments where it feels scarier than The Exorcist to me, because I think you know, The Exorcist is probably a scarier overall movie, and that's the purpose of that movie, is to scare you. But there are parts of cruising that are deeply unsettling. There's someone in my film school class, I think, made a movie called I'm Looking Through Your Window, which is the best horror movie.
Great title. Great title.
But like that idea, right? Like that idea that there's like, oh, like you're being watched, and in your most vulnerable moment, like when you are like taking off your clothes, there is someone waiting, you know, to kill you.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch briefly on the killer. So Dan, you've seen this movie more than me, so you probably have a better idea. My thought here is that there are 3 killers. I think there is a killer who is
Are they
doing
all
the
speaking through
dismemberment.
him?
No. So I think there's a killer who's doing the dismemberment and tossing people in the water, because they were like, the kitchen knife could dismember, but it's really hard. So I feel like there is a 3rd killer that we are not being privy to. There is the guy they catch that Pacino stabs in the stomach. That is the primary. And then at the end, we're led to believe that Pacino, who I guess, not to put a label on it, but seems to be a closeted man, has killed his neighbor.
Right. That is such an interesting way to wrap up the movie too. It like opens up all these like new questions, and then like the movie's over. It's so interesting.
I thought it was genius. Like I thought because the idea is that the primary killer kills people out of a kind of like embarrassment or like fear of being discovered as who he is, and the idea that Pacino is like we never see him consummate anything. We see him almost consummate something, but it's like Pacino, who's clearly like at the very least attracted to men, is embarrassed by it, is trying to return to this normalcy at the end, and to do that he has to kill this person who is only kind to him, that like he could have just had a relationship with. You know what I mean?
It's what's also cool about that is how that particular moment, the vagary in that moment I think is really interesting, because it could easily have been that his neighbor's partner who was jealous of that character's relationship with John Forbes, quote unquote, with Al Pacino, and who
he knows they've been having those domestic
those debates. But there's also a way that Friedkin shoots the corpse, and there's this like look of surprise on the victim's face, this look of like, which I don't know. Again, this is sort of like just Kuleshov effect. Like you read into the editing what's there, but or what may not be there. I mean, but it almost seems that Friedkin is suggesting that the victim, like, yes, he knew the attacker, there was no struggle, but that he was almost surprised that someone who he thought was kind to him, was his friend, was doing this, which would lend credence to the idea that it was Al Pacino and not his boyfriend who he's been fighting every day for, however long. And it was, that's another reason why I kind of like, even them, the two of them, I kind of wanted to maybe another scene between them as Pacino's getting deeper into the S&M and the culture, maybe to contrast, like, because it doesn't seem like, what is this character's name? I think it's Ted, maybe. Something with a T. I'm going to say Ted. I might be wrong.
The guy with the impeccable fashion sense.
Yes.
Right.
It doesn't seem like he's per se a part of the leather subculture. He knows about it, but it seems like he's a bit more of a
he's writing his play.
Yes, he's writing his
he's
play.
More of a bookworm.
Yeah, he's more of a bookworm. So it would have been interesting.
Oh God, I love that. I'm so sorry to interrupt. There was a line of dialogue that really stuck out to me. He's talking about how his boyfriend is at the beach, and he says, "The world can wait for whatever play I can turn out, but the summer sun waits for no man," or something like that. This movie is laden with like great little lines like that.
No, it's really well
real Columbia MFA shit right there. Something.
But it's it's good.
And because of that, I wanted just maybe if it was one more moment to observe the contrast and how deeply John Forbes has gone into this culture. Now, as to whether or not he had always been closeted or what have you. That's interesting. It's one way to read the movie. I think what just occurred to me is also fascinating is like the ways in which some of his operations, some of the things he says as a police officer could also be mapped to just a gay civilian. There's an interesting thing where like when they're being he brings that guy into his motel room who he thinks might be the killer, and then they do the sting and the guys arrest him. When Al Pacino comes out and he says, "You came in too early. You were too early." Either he means
you were already tied up.
Either he means I didn't have enough information, or he means I kind of wanted that to go further physically, and you interrupted me. I think that's really interesting. How like his role starts to become gray, obviously, as the film goes on.
I just feel so bad for that guy.
Yeah, that was
it's
awful.
like when the cops are listening through the briefcase and the headphones, that really old timey bust thing.
Sting operation.
Yeah. The guy is going, this is weird.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to
He's
do
like,
this.
this is really weird.
Yeah.
And then they bust him anyway.
Yeah.
It's like he's like clearly not the guy.
Yeah, just not that guy.
You're not that guy now.
Not that guy.
The one of the funnier sequences in the movie is when they bust Pacino, and Pacino's like tied up, and he's like, "Hey,
what are you doing? Get out of here! Scram!"
Come on.
Well, you know what's so funny, dude? I wonder. I'm sure someone has written about this in a Friedkin book or a New Hollywood book, but it's so interesting the way. And I love De Niro. De Niro is one of my favorite actors, but De Niro didn't take risks.
No, absolutely not.
The way
Absolutely not.
Pacino did, which is maybe why De Niro is still considered one of the greats, and Pacino's kind of like Pacino. I think Pacino is one of the greats, but I think De Niro generally is considered to be an acting heavyweight still, and I think Pacino frequently is thought of as like, Big Al, which I think is.
He always just fully put his faith in Scorsese. But who's to say if he takes Raging Bull if Scorsese isn't the one who makes that movie, right?
Well, I think it's like, I think De Niro always plays with a few exceptions. Always plays with his macho image.
One way or another,
never
he's
like
pivoting
stripping
around.
away.
Right.
Even King of Comedy is kind of like a macho guy in like a stand-up comic kind of way.
And the
I
war
think
with
De Niro's
Grandpa is like a macho guy. Who's like a grandpa.
And bad Grandpa is a macho guy. Is about a macho guy who smashes Audrey Plaza. Yeah.
Does that happen in that movie?
It sure does. Wow.
She was
he just like me.
Mark
He just like me
Hamill,
for real.
Chucky and Smash.
What's the movie where he fights Sylvester Stallone? A Grudge Match. There we go. Where he boxes Sylvester Stallone.
But Pacino, all this to say, Pacino takes risks with his career. With this movie, later, with Jack and Jill, he takes
Panic in Needle Park, man. To circle back to that, I was
totally kidding. Jack and Jill's not a good movie. we walked right
movie
over the joke.
I see what you mean, though,
Jack
Wes.
And
I think we were having this conversation in another chat a while ago, but I think between the two of them, you could probably count a few more times, again, in that early span of his career through the 70s, where he was not messing, but he was finding his image, and in that he was taking on different kinds of roles. I think De Niro sort of was locked in from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, even with like Cape Fear, where he's being like a psychopath, he's still macho.
Sure.
But I would say that's probably the most like. That's one of the more distinct.
Covers more ground, though.
Yeah,
he goes from like hopeless drug addict to like hopeless drug kingpin.
Exactly, there's a real arc to his career. I wanted to circle back to the cops in the movie because I think what's really interesting about them, and this is maybe my last major point, is that Friedkin, more in this movie, but a little bit in The Exorcist, has a way of getting into the mind of the policeman. Which in a way that doesn't necessarily like seek to redeem or illuminate about them or anything, but it just kind of it shows what the job does to a person in varying degrees. Like you look at Paul Sorvino in this, and even though they probably have some makeup on him, you're like, oh, this guy, like his life is much worse than whatever it was before he became an officer.
What do you think of that scene where the young, I guess like you would say drag queen? I don't think we know enough about her. She could be a trans woman, but she's the informant, and he has her, and she goes, "I need to talk to you," and they go into his office to speak in private, and she talks to him about Joe Spinell sexually assaulting her, and he almost seems to. It's not like just a rejection. It's also like, oh God, now I have to deal with this. And he's like, bring me a name and a badge number, or don't come in here with stories like that. And just kind of like shoved her out of the office. It's a really interesting scene.
It is. I mean, I
guess it's all complicity, right?
Yes, there's definitely that. And I also think, also by the end, when he sees that dude and he sees his name tag, he realizes, oh, she wasn't lying. But I think that I was actually expecting a bit more like like flagrant homophobia in the script, like from the cops to which, and it doesn't seem to go in that direction.
You get a little bit of
Yeah.
that like early on, but it tracks. I mean,
Right, for who
New
they
York
are,
City
but I guess
cops.
even with that, movies can sometimes obviously turn the dial up to 11 and kind of like really focus on like whatever phobia the thing is. And I felt like it wasn't so heightened that it felt like you were just being like you were just putting yourself. Bill Friedkin was putting his own. It felt very tasteful. It felt tastefully applied.
In terms of how this aged, I mean, I think it gets a lot of roses from the queer community. Like this is one that they circle back to.
They protested it when it came out. I don't know about now.
Decent,
yeah, they did.
But now
also,
it's got a pretty decent
few,
following.
It's one of those things that also like there was a few like murders around the time, and people were like, "Oh, well, it's cruising's fault," which is always, you know, I mean, is kind of the old.
I said,
Loomis,
don't you go blaming the movies.
Killers.
Yeah. Movies don't
movies don't make killers.
Movies make psychos more.
Movies make psychos more. Yeah. Justin, you just watched those movies. You can't engage.
I'm sorry.
You're not ready.
But yeah,
But when the movie came out, it was kind of like a Last Temptation of Christ thing where they like hadn't seen it and they were picketing it. Is that what was going on?
Yeah, and also, you know, I think it's not unfair to say it may have hit Pacino's career for a second. Like for a second, people were like, "Why would you take cruising?" Like, you're Al Pacino, and you know, but he's always been a guy that's been interested in like weirder stuff. He takes Serpico, he takes Dog Day Afternoon, like he takes things that are a little
Dog Day Afternoon is great. Oh yes, so he that makes it two movies then around this like same era where he's
characters. Yeah.
Like I said, I think that it you know, I find it mostly you could probably, if we had our ducks in a row when this movie came out, you could probably pair this with like Holy Spider.
Okay.
And there's a lot of criticism that's leveled against that movie for how it seems to sensationalize and linger too much on the psyche of the man who's murdering these sex workers rather than like the actual devastation that may be left in those people's lives. This movie, I don't think does that per se. I think this movie actually manages to have its cake and eat it too, where it's procedural and you want to get the guy who's doing this, but even by the time, and maybe to sort of fight back against my own point earlier about the killer's motivation, maybe expanding on that too much would have led to sort of a slippery road where we're saying that like, oh, men who are sexually abused by men always become serial killers, or we're saying, or we're just finding another way to justify what he's done. So maybe leaving it vague kind of gave Friedkin some room to breathe and not worry about that. But I think that this movie does, from my perspective, I think it achieves a balance of like communicating a tragedy without overindulging in it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
I just really like, I don't know, man. When Dan first brought this up to peel back the curtain of us doing a Freakin' Day, I was hesitant because we had already been doing The Exorcist, and I was like, I don't know, man. Like he was great, but I think there's a kind of filmmaking that he employs in this movie that is really exciting and feels very modern and contemporary, and doesn't even feel like it's aged. Like it's aged in the sense of we don't make movies that look like this anymore, unfortunately. You know, and he also has a quality to his movies where like his movies are, someone said this to me in a meeting recently where they said prestige popcorn, where it's like movies that take themselves very seriously but are designed to be entertainment for mass consumption. So you watch The Exorcist and you're like, man, I could just watch that again right now. You know what I mean? You watch Cruising, which on its face is a police horror movie about dead gay sex workers, and you're like, man, I could watch that again, man. That was
it's a banger. That was a banger.
So yeah, I mean, R.I.P. to the GOAT. I guess he was great. He's amazing.
We got one more to go through, but I would say since these are both sort of older movies that we're digging up, I guess we can give Morgue ratings for both of them. So I would say it's a definite reanimate for me, high reanimate.
Definitely.
I think that it has a lot of value in it, both in terms of its craft and the actual storytelling. There were some, like I said, some things that I maybe wanted to see more of relationally between characters, but I think it's still very interesting, and it's a great Pacino performance, especially to support the replacement theory. So yeah, I'd say Reanimate.
Listen, Pacino has good performances. Heat is maybe Pacino's best performance. It is also like the most Pacino performance on the planet.
What about you, Dan?
I really love Dog Day Afternoon, Panic in Needle Park, and this one for like the Pacino performances that go kind of unmentioned a lot of the time. But this is a high Reanimate for me too, man. I love this movie. It was managed to still be surprising even upon rewatch. I was like, oh wow, like here's all these things that I forgot about. It's so idiosyncratic and like so interesting. I don't know. I wonder what kind of like modern prestige filmmaker would try and adapt this like same screenplay and like what differences there would be. Sure, but I mean, but there's all that police procedural stuff, and it's like Friedkin kind of dips his toes in that with French Connection, and like would Guadagnino even be interested in all that stuff? You know, like this movie's kind of like a perfect harmony of like all of Friedkin's interests, I think, and it's also through that lens of the underground S&M community. Yeah, it's so interesting and like so of its time, which like really kind of enhances the experience for me. So I Reanimate. Yeah.
Fincher? Would it not be
No,
Fincher?
I don't think so. I wouldn't really see Fincher making this movie.
Fincher doing 47 takes of a man taking his pants off.
Oh, I could see it. I could see Fincher doing this with like Adam Driver.
I feel like Fincher's whole thing is like cool guy cinema, and I just don't really see him doing S&M.
I mean, in the Killer, it's like.
Hang on, I'm watching The Killer tonight.
The Killer is the most Reddit movie ever made. It's so,
but The
like,
Killer
I
is like
think the movie's great. It's very Reddit. You know what I mean?
The Killer is like about an uncool guy who has like an inner monologue who's really.
It's about a Reddit dweller. He calls other people normies. You know.
I would also
Smiths
say
all the time, which was very cool.
I would also say it's a high Reanimate. I really enjoyed it. I thought, I loved Pacino. I love the way it was shot. I love the blues and the blacks, and I love whenever someone steps out of view, they become a silhouette immediately. That's a lot of fun. I love the sound design, the crinkles of belts, and
it's great.
The leather,
the boots, and the jackets.
Great, really, really great movie. A movie I wasn't expecting to like as much as I did.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was really good.
Me too. Good.
News to me though that it was protests to that. I need to look into that.
Yeah, it was.
I think the community's like reaction to the movie is like so different back then than how it is now. That's really interesting because that wouldn't be the first time a Friedkin movie almost got banned.
Yeah.
So,
well, he stayed on the edge.
Good for him, man. Yes, good to be provocative. It is. That's cool.
So we'll continue this conversation when we come back from our second break with an earlier film, 1977, Sorcerer.
It's funny. I'm not sure if there's a piece of trivia here that's really interesting. Do you know what movie Sorcerer came out against, like, in the same weekend?
No.
Little known movie.
Was it Star Wars?
You might know it's Star Wars, yeah.
Oh my God.
No, came out the same weekend as Star Wars, completely got dwarfed by what is the second blockbuster ever made. Completely dwarfed. Box office, like, abysmal, and to kind of like console everybody, Friedkin's like, well, come awards season, we're gonna walk away with something. Award season comes, it gets one nomination, and it's for best sound, which of course they lose again to Star Wars.
Wow.
So Star Wars also goes home with best picture, just to kind of add insult to injury there. It's funny though, because much like the film, this shares an opening weekend with Sorcerer, centers around a ragtag team, overcoming impossible odds to, I guess, like liberate a population, right? In a lot of ways, dropping the nitroglycerin is kind of like making that little perfect shot into the Death Star.
Death Star. Yeah, well, that
in a lot of ways.
No, I was going to ask before you continue, just because. So, is that actually the delivery of the dynamite is for this? Is for like the rebellion?
They're fighting fire with fire.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Trying to. It was an interesting plan for sure, and then it's of course wrapped up in just the most insane. Trappings, I guess. Yeah. What did you think of the actual like kind of conceit here?
So,
which is these men of different backgrounds doing this crazy thing.
Yeah, I think it's really compelling. I love movies about dudes in distress. So it's like it reminded me
having to work together.
Yeah, having to just figure it out. I said in my Letterboxd review that they would probably make a great pairing with Da 5 Bloods. There was a lot of similarities I found, and it also made me even think a little bit of Carpenter's The Thing, just like different guys. And I mean,
and their dynamics.
Yeah, their dynamics together. I like the idea of circumstance forcing you to do something you would never do otherwise.
Right.
And this sort of desperation that all of these men are under, that that compels them to take up this suicide trip. But only one of them makes it back, which is Roy Scheider. I think it's really interesting. I think, due to my own, like I texted you, my own scheduling conflicts, I was like watching it intermittently. And if I sat
and I totally relate to you, man, because like that, without knowing that opening is a bunch of vignettes, it's like it's impossible to follow. You think like one event inspires the next, and it's a bunch of and now this has happened. Like it opens with Nero assassinating the guy, and then it goes into Qassem, the Palestinian man, being on the run from the IDF, and then it goes into right before Roy Schneider and pulling the heist on the
French
Catholic
dude
church, him and the Irish gang, the French dude, and it's like when I first saw this, like I was just like you, I had no idea those were a bunch of vignettes, so I was like really struggling to like follow what was going on, and then the movie kind of like fills itself out. I'd say about like half an hour in, and lets you know that like that's all just kind of the prologue, like four kind of prologues, if you will, like that go into the four of them being in this place and needing a means of getting out, and therefore needing one another.
The search for citizenship being like, or just, citizenship just being in this case like the key to a new life for themselves. And here,
and they're all like living in squalor. Qassem's one friend might be an ex-Nazi, so I mean, it's definitely like a melting pot of like different personalities that all find themselves in this one village. Really, really interesting. Like, I don't even think I realized that that's what was going on with the Qassem character when I first saw this. He was a Palestinian militant who kind of, in active protest, organizes this attack, if you will. And the IDF busts him and his buddies. Well, his buddies get busted,
and he's out of the house,
and he sees his buddy get like carried away. And I mean, I struggle to even like now think of another like, American movie for Western audiences that portrays like a Palestinian man as like a very likable and nuanced protagonist.
I remember when that part of the movie started in Jerusalem, I seized in my chest. I was like, oh, this is a very interesting time to be watching this movie.
It's going to be interesting to talk about that.
But I see your point. I can't think of another time. When
he's like on that bridge, it's like, holy shit, like not
I don't want
he's the best.
There were actual, and we'll get through it, or we'll get to it as we go through, but there was one moment where even despite stopping and starting this movie throughout the day so many times, there was this moment that happens, and I covered my mouth. Like I was so shocked by what
was it on the bridge?
No, it actually wasn't. It was later. It's like right towards the end. Although the bridge scene, I mean, that's obviously like the key centerpiece, right?
I'm gonna go out like on a limb here. I'm gonna say that has to be not just of the genre or the decade. That has to be top 5 most suspenseful scenes in a motion picture in any movie. Like that is like a solid 5 minutes of just like white knuckle, holy shit. Like when I first saw this, it was at the Paris Theater's Big and Loud thing that they were doing, where they completely redesigned the sound system and stuff.
Okay.
And they were showing all these movies that they have on prints and movies that are like made for like crazy Dolby sound. And they were showing Sorcerer on a print, and you could like, just like I had never seen it. A bunch of people in the crowd, you could tell had never seen it before, and people were like,
yeah,
like, you know, I went with a friend, and you know, the whole time she was like digging her nails into my arm. I was like, dude, God, this scene, like specifically that scene, fucking holds up. I mean,
how much
that is like a masterclass.
How much do you know about the production of not just the movie but that scene? Because I mean, I can't think of a way that he films that without actually doing it. Like,
I gotta say, man, like if I was in that position, like I know we're in a hurry and stuff, but like I'm just gonna camp in the car for the night, wait for the rain to stop, and like not have the water level be so high, like washing over the bridge before we drive over this fucking rickety ramshackle thing. No, that must have been the case, and you know, I'm sure stunt drivers or what have you, and I'm sure they took proper precautions to make sure the bridge wouldn't give out. But God, that is like, no, the only way to like do that is to do that. It's so impressive.
It's also a testimony. This movie really. The production design stands out in a lot of ways. They're in this remote Colombian town. You can feel the sweat. You can kind of like just feel how humid it is.
Absolutely.
And everyone just looks.
Yeah, aesthetically, I feel like this is a lot like Apocalypse Now.
Interesting.
Like it's just every frame is so like past that, you know, prologue is so mud drenched and fucking and sweaty and blood soaked. And like, God, these guys are. I doubt they've ever been wetter in their lives, and with you know, various fluids
everything going on, and I think the highlight of the production design is that truck, especially when it's coming over the. It looks like a monster.
Yeah.
It reminded me of
Oh, absolutely.
It reminded me of
when you see the poster, you think it's about some like killer truck.
Well, I thought of Duel when I was watching it. Spielberg's Duel, because it was like. There's a word that I should have looked up before we recorded, but it has to do with like the ability to see faces in inanimate objects. And that truck, grill has a face.
I feel you.
And so when it's
aggressive,
climbing over this bridge, like, and all the things they have to do to, because he makes the hitman guy get out and like chart he makes him climb in front of it first, right? And then Kassem gets
I love their little problem solving moments that they do here. We're like Roy Schneider's like chopping down the trees, and Nero goes, "You're like crazy or whatever." And he's like, "It's just 3 or 4 trees," and throws him the machete to start digging, and he pulls out the gun on him and make your move, and shoots the wall behind him. That's just like a perfect like, little moment of filmmaking there between those two characters and the circumstance they're in.
We have we have Jackie Scanlon / Juan Dominguez played by Roy Scheider. We have Victor Manson / Serrano, who is the French man who's masquerading as.
Love Serrano, man.
He's an interesting character, very interesting.
He's good.
Then we have Francisco Rabal as Nilo.
Not Nilo. Okay.
And then Amidou as Kassem / Martinez. I think it's very interesting that Roy Scheider, who is one of the whitest looking men ever, like is trying to trick people into thinking he's a Dominguez. He's got
great. I just like as an actor, I think he's got to be one of the most underrated like leading men.
He looks great in this movie,
man. Like he's got this like sorrow that's just like set in his face. You know what I mean? Where like just his resting face just looks like there's like so much going on behind his eyes.
The moment after the car crash when he meets with this guy who's setting him up to take the plane ride, and he's just beat to crap, and he's got like the broken nose bandage. Like he looks really cool, like a protagonist in this kind of movie. And I think, I mean, the only other thing I can remember seeing him in is Jaws, obviously. So
yeah, Jaws is the big one. Yeah. He's in French Connection.
Okay, I still have to watch that. So was he one of, because Friedkin because even the friend who sent him on the trip, that guy shows up in Cruising as well. He's one of the detectives. Yeah. So Friedkin, I guess like any other director, had a few faces that he liked to,
has his boys.
That he liked to rotate.
You know, he's got his boys. These are the boys.
It seemed like he liked to maybe switch up the lead, but he loved to use the same supporting cast.
Definitely.
Here and there.
Definitely. The funny bit of trivia about this, I guess it's not so much trivia as just as much as it's like a collective like response. No one knew what this movie like was supposed to be. Like the trailers don't make it like very clear, and then like it's called Sorcerer, so you imagine it's like a fantasy thing, and then the poster is like a truck on a bridge, so it's like, what's going on? I think that kind of, I mean, nothing was ever going to make more money than Star Wars on the same weekend. But I think the fact that like no one really quite like knew what it was, whereas like comparatively like with Star Wars, I mean, that shit was already on lunchboxes like prior to the movie like officially dropping. So but like even now people are always like, I just watched Sorcerer and I had no idea that that's the movie it was, but it's got this like apocalyptic aesthetic to it. You know, it really feels like an end of the world, like a Mad Max thing,
there's a direness to it, and I think that's what maybe some people are taking away as maybe that apocalyptic feeling. It's got me curious what else I'm looking up now. Like highest grossing films came up for 1977. Obviously Star Wars is number one. Right after is Smokey and the Bandit, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind at third.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that came out that year.
And then you have Saturday Night Fever, The Goodbye Girl, A Bridge Too Far, The Deep, The Spy Who Loved Me, Oh God.
Nice.
American comedy film with George Burns and John Denver, and then Annie Hall at number 10.
Oh wow.
So
Woody Allen fucking beat Friedkin.
I mean, because of that, I'm curious, like if Star Wars didn't come out in 77, it's interesting to think about what
like I
Sorcerer
said, man, it's the marketing, and I mean, I feel like this would have been on theater screens for like 2 weeks, and the returns would have been, they would have just been like, we can use this auditorium to sell out more Star Wars shows. It's like, well, why even continue?
Well, yeah. So according to Wikipedia, the budget was 21 to 22 million, and the box office was 5.9 million between theatrical and rentals, and then 9 million worldwide. So it's
didn't even break even.
No,
didn't even break even on a small budget.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Also, where does this come in Friedkin's career as far as what he's made before?
This is I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, I'm pretty sure it's right after The Exorcist.
It is.
Let me see. Yeah.
4 years between them.
The only thing in between is a short thing that he did where he interviews Fritz Lang that wasn't even like a movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, Exorcist. So 4 years, like you said. Yeah. That's crazy. And he would have been, I mean, that would have been the most famous that he was in his career. Mm-hmm. And for him to drop this movie and like it not even to break even, that must have been very humbling. I mean, not to rip on the guy.
No,
you know, like that happens to every filmmaker, I think, at some point. But I mean, that is brutal.
Yeah,
that's really brutal.
Yeah.
Damn. Follows it up with The Brinks Job, which I have not seen. PG movie from 78.
The Brinks Job.
Sorry.
No, it's
distracted. The Brinks Job. Boston fictional retelling of the infamous Boston Brinks Company robbery on January 17th.
Okay,
so it's a heist.
Friedkin loves a heist, I guess.
No, he loves he loves his blue collar guys having to
figure it out,
do something to get ahead, and maybe find themselves along the way.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
It's you know, I think also one of the highlights, the bridge scene, I was gripped by, but also that was like the one thing everyone talks about. So going in, I knew that was coming. Mm-hmm. I also thought that, and this is when I had the Five Bloods connection, but the scene where they have to clear the tree from the road, I think is so interesting. Really, and obviously it's like they get across the bridge and then there's this last obstacle and Nilo has like a mental breakdown and just starts laughing.
Yeah.
And that Kassem like gets up calmly and he walks over it and he's like, I think I can clear it. And you're like, oh, of course, like the bomb builder, like if anyone's going to be able to. And so finding a way to use a little bit of the nitro and then rigging this like sand trap so he can time it so he can get far away enough. And then the explosion itself. I mean, these are some of the great explosions.
Like Kevin McAllister with that.
Yeah. These are some of the great explosions in cinematic history for sure.
Great. Absolutely.
And it did very much remind me of like that Five Blood scene where Jonathan Major steps on the mine. And so Delroy Lindo has to figure out how to get him off the mine without, so that he doesn't die. But yeah, what you're talking about. So this is the scene that was probably the most shocking for me is they get past all of it. It looks like the sun's coming up. You've got Serrano and Kassem in the truck, and Serrano's talking about the watch that his wife gave him. And then the wheel goes over
Dude.
one piece of road that falls out, and they're gone.
My friends I saw this with, when I saw it in theaters, my friend was like, I should have known the second he starts talking about his wife.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're probably, that should have been like the giveaway. Yeah. He starts talking about how much he misses his wife and like the little object of affinity, you know, and then that, of course, would just usher in that character is going to die right now.
I mean, it's also even
it's heartbreaking.
Even in the actual humanity, like within the film, it's the one moment where he's not focused on like his own life, and he takes his eyes off the road for like a minute, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
He's just up.
And the tire blows, right?
No, it's that a piece of the road gives underneath them, and it tips the whole truck into the ravine. And then you see he has the shot of the nitro falling forward in the back, so you know there's nothing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like it's like a saw trap, right? It's like you have to make good on this like conceit of danger that you have the character in. It's like a lot of the time, if like someone survives a saw trap, like people are like, oh, well, I kind of wanted to see what it was going to do. So like most of the time, people they fail the trap so that it can deliver on the promise of, and now his eyeballs are going to get vacuumed out, that kind of thing. But like way before those movies, it's like there were probably people sitting there going, I like these guys, but I kind of
somebody should
see
die.
The truck.
Somebody should go. Yeah. And then after that, they run into these freedom fighters. I think when I rewatch this, because I will, there's the aspect of like the whole sort of socio-political struggle that's happening in this town.
Yeah,
definitely went over my head during this. So I'd want to rewatch to kind of graft onto that more, because it's like we said, it's very interesting that they just wind up being instruments of this, because it's maybe incidentally they'll find their freedom by completing this task,
right.
And I think also if I rewatch it, there's probably hints to each of these characters differing, maybe not so much Nilo because we know so little about him, but they're differing ideologies as it would pertain to exactly this struggle that's happening. I mean, Roy is playing this Irish mobster who rips off a Catholic church. So he may be like maybe he's like, even on a morality spectrum, you could say maybe he's one of the less moral guys. And then you've got Serrano, who is a defrauder.
I mean, I would watch a movie that's just about that. That's just about the gang that Schneider was with, and their kind of warring factions with the other gang.
Exactly, because just at the end, they come back.
Yeah. Oh, dude, in fantastic ending. But I was just gonna say, great little touch in his prologue there, where the woman is like getting married, and she just like casually has a black eye. And it's like, oh, okay, so this gang that they're robbing they're probably shitty dudes to begin with.
That was another thing I didn't fully. At first, I thought that he was actually a cop, and I didn't realize until later, after the movie was over, that they had been a mob together. But yeah, no, there's probably both in that and maybe in Kasem, there are like fuller movies that could have been told. But yeah, I mean, bringing all four of them together is fascinating.
This is before the era of spinoffs and Disney Plus and all that stuff. Had Sorcerer been probably Star Wars instead of, and like Star Wars was Sorcerer, like box office wise, maybe Disney would have bought the rights to it.
We'd have a Kasem series.
Kasem, a sorcerer's story.
It's Andor, but it's with Kasem. Are you aware of other, really for either of these movies, I meant to ask for the last one too, alternative cuts, director's cuts or anything like that? I
don't know. I think it's just the cuts of it that exist. I don't think Friedkin was like a Coppola, how like Coppola is always like, well, the cut that exists of Apocalypse Now is just kind of the assembly cut, and I'm still working. He said that like for decades and decades, and then like would release like 2 more cuts of Apocalypse Now. I don't think he was like a Coppola personality. I think with Friedkin, it was like, no, this is pretty much what I envisioned, and it's out there. No need to go back and mess with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that Exorcist does have that distinction, but I guess even with Exorcist, there's only really the one, like there's the spider walk thing,
the one main thing, the main thing,
which is different. I also think I mean, we talked about Fincher obviously a little bit, and I don't think I wouldn't say that they're entirely similar at all. There's an interest in procedure that is shared between them for sure. There's an interest in psyche that's shared between them. I was going to say that Friedkin, all three of these movies, well, he denied it a little bit with Sorcerer, but all three of them are adaptations. Exorcist, Cruising, and Sorcerer are all adaptations of source material. I know what he specifically denied was
the Wages of Fear.
What he specifically denied was that it was a remake of that 50s movie that had already come out.
I think it's like a Carpenter's The Thing, you know, we're like, it's an adaptation of Who Goes There by Joseph Campbell. And that story had been adapted in the past, but like Carpenter's wasn't actually a remake of that movie. It was just adapting the source material again.
In a different way.
And
I don't know. I'm not as avid a reader as I used to be. I'm trying to get back into it.
Sure.
But I feel novels, the act of condensing a novel into a film is
Herculean. I mean, that's hard. Did we say it at the same time?
We did.
Oh my God. Thanks. Okay. It's funny though, because like I remember reading East of Eden by Steinbeck, and that's like gotta be 600 pages around there somewhere. And you know, the story begins with like this guy Adam and his brother, and they have like you know, a tough relationship. They don't really get along. He meets this sex worker who has been like beaten and stuff. Her name's Kathy, and she's supposed to be like the embodiment of like evil in the story. It's like a retelling of the Bible, specifically the Cain and Abel story. So the story of Cain and Abel keeps repeating itself like throughout the book, where it's like him and his brother in the beginning, and then he has these sons, and the sons like don't get along, and there's the whole "I'm not my brother's keeper" thing done. So it's like a running motif in the book. When they adapt that, the Elia Kazan movie with James Dean, they only adapt like the last third of it. And so this is always like my example of like how, you know, it's really tricky to adapt certain, because you know, you can't adapt the whole thing. It would be like at least 4 hours, but in skipping out on like the beginning of that book, like you miss the motif of like history repeating itself, which is kind of like the whole point of Steinbeck's book. It's like even this story from the Bible will like repeat itself like until history is, you know, at its close. I mean, just like, you know, for an example, like what you're saying is true. It's really hard to cross mediums. I mean, we see it all the time. Like video games can't get adapted because they always fuck it up. It's really hard to adapt that medium and change it into something else.
There's always something vital about each medium, right? I mean, that makes it what
the medium
it is.
is the message,
right? And so to that end, when you set about, I think, transferring something, you have to. You know you can't replicate what was specific to the medium you're taking it out of, but you can use the strengths of what you're putting it into to hopefully elevate the story in a new way. And I think, you know, novels have what movies can't do, which is like movies have narration, but you can't really do internal monologue the same way that you can. You can't spend,
and you read a novel at your own pace.
Exactly.
So really, like pacing is kind of like figured out beforehand, and then like in a movie, they can adapt a part of the novel that you're reading at your own pace, and like just doesn't match up with the pace that you have in your mind when you're
in
going
your
through
head.
the story.
So it's I mean, I can't even say that I've necessarily read anything that if I were presented with the opportunity, I'd want to adapt. I also feel that, you know, this is part of why miniseries are so popular for book adaptations, because the idea of having more time to flesh things out, which can work. But I think without having read, you know, The Wages of Fear, Sorcerer feels like it's like I can imagine reading the bridge crossing scene just from having watched it. I can imagine how how the author would describe something like that. The weight of the truck, the pounding rain and the wind and the shakiness of the bridge. Like it's all because there's really no actual dialogue. There's like some shouted lines, but there's not like, it's just raw desperation. And I actually, when it was over, I went back. It's like 10 minutes from the time they arrive at the start of the bridge to when they get off. It's just 10 minutes.
And when he falls through the bridge, man, and like the sound cuts out and the screen goes to black, and he's like trying to climb back up, and the truck is just like trudging along. It's like, it's like, oh, I like that.
I thought it was gonna roll. I thought it did roll over his leg
yeah.
at the very least. It was
God.
very stressful.
Just lightning in a bottle. That whole sequence.
Yeah,
really amazing.
It's like you said, he made the hell out of that movie.
Yeah, for sure.
He really and the thing I also respect about Friedkin, from what I've learned over these last 2 episodes, is that he seems to like be willing to get in the trenches with his actors and his crew. He's not gonna like tell you to do something and not.
No, he wasn't
himself,
sitting
so
in Video Village that whole time while they were running the truck over the bridge. For sure.
Yeah, he was out there for better and or for worse.
In the trenches, man.
Yeah, and that's it. Again, because of like maybe his documentary interests, it lends to that sense of realism.
Yeah.
You have any other major points?
I don't know. I really love this movie. I'm trying to think of if there's like a major thing that maybe we skipped.
It's like a lot of set pieces.
Yes, definitely. But there's also Nilo. Was it Nilo or Nero?
Mm-hmm.
Nilo. He assassinates Kasem's friend, and I guess I always had some confusion. Like, is he in the? Because we know that he's a hitman for hire. He's a hired gun in the beginning of the movie. The very first thing you see is him assassinating a man in his apartment. And so I wondered, like, did he kill that guy so that he could usurp his position as one of the drivers of the truck because he also just needs money to get out of this town? Or was he a hired gun to go and kill like Kasem's friend that Kasem finds dead in the apartment? Or was it like I guess it couldn't be both, but it's like, was he a hired gun or did he really just need what that guy had?
That job.
Right? Interesting bit of storytelling there, because I do believe it's like purposefully ambiguous. And then Kasem calls him, accuses him of being a Zionist, and calls him a Jewish dog. But from the rest of the movie, I'm pretty sure he's Italian. Like I don't think they ever say that he's Jewish, and he's certainly. Right. I think Kasem gets the impression because he kills the guy who is like suspected of maybe being an ex-Nazi. But it's an interesting bit of writing there because there's no real way to know exactly what's going on, and we never get like an answer to that because Roy Schneider doesn't want to fucking talk to the guy.
No. Yeah, it's that scene definitely is one that I'd have to go back and pay closer attention to. It may be that I guess I interpreted it as maybe the former option. I think you said, or not the former, the latter, which is that he took it out of desperation, or just like, I need to get out of here.
But he's still like a well-dressed man, like he is when he's a hitman in the beginning of in the beginning of the movie. He's wearing a suit, he's very dapper, and he assassinates the guy. And then when we see him again, he doesn't look like the rest of the people in the town, which kind of gave me the inkling that maybe he was a hired gun to go there and like kill it. But like, who would
or destabilize the rebellion or something?
Maybe he's like there on a job. It could be both. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Interesting writing though for his character and just kind of his origin and how he happens across the gig, as it were.
Yeah.
Great characters, like I said. The movie's got really interesting characters.
They're all good. They're all very distinct, and obviously part of that is pulling them from different regions of the world. But yeah, I think there's the DNA of something like this can be seen in a lot of different things,
definitely,
and probably was seen before. But yeah, like the ragtag assembly,
in
even going
Star
back
Wars,
to
the same weekend,
weekend, even like Seven Samurai, right?
Definitely,
that kind of thing.
So, what did you think of Serrano's buddy? Who in his we keep going back to their prologues, but they're pretty dynamic prologues. When his buddy finds out that his dad will not lend him the money to get out of this whole fraud situation, and so he's like, "It's all right, like it's okay, like don't worry, we'll figure it out later." His buddy goes into the car and just kills himself.
And shoots himself.
Just like the back windshield blows out.
I thought like he'd been assassinated or something.
Yeah.
But he just figured, I'm going to be in prison and I can't handle it.
I can't bullshit myself anymore. It's like, I wonder if it's supposed to be funny because when Serrano goes over to make sure and sees that he's killed himself, he goes, and like does that to the car.
The top of the car.
And then they cut away like you would in a comedy, like, and then just something else. And like, my audience like laughed when I saw this in theaters. I wondered if that was supposed to be like, because it is a funny moment.
It's so jarring that it feels a little bit like it's a comedic beat. And Friedkin isn't. I don't think foreign to those, even as heavy as the material is in
There's
his
dark
films.
comedy in The Exorcist for sure.
For sure. And like we talked about the big black daddy
Yes,
cop
yes.
who smacks
Which
the guy.
we surprisingly didn't spend a lot of time on.
Oh, we didn't spend too
is,
much time on that.
That is a pretty interesting scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I who's to say? I do think that it's quickly sort of overtaken by the tragedy of him being like, tell my wife I have to go away on business. Yeah. And then he never sees her again. Well. I would say in closing, really enjoyed it. Will want to rewatch in one complete sitting. So I can't say immortal, but I would say another high reanimate. I think it's on the precipice. I rated it a little higher than Cruising because I felt like even though its ending was also vague, there was a bit more of a finality to the character and a bit more, like you understood, I think, the full journey that Roy Scheider's character had been through, where it was just like he's just broken. Kind of
tragic, man. Kind of tragic because he actually waits for the plane. He wants the plane to wait for him. He goes, "Can I get a few minutes?" Yeah. And much like like the finales to The Sopranos, probably where he is and when he is, and the fact that he's right there is his undoing.
Yeah. If he had left just a few seconds earlier instead of waiting for that death.
It's tragic. It's a great ending though. Fantastic. Yeah. Because of course, like that, like you said in the Strange show that we did, the bill comes due.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say Reanimate for sure. I think these two movies were very well picked out of Friedkin's filmography to look at because they one of them is no, they're both after The Exorcist, but they have his DNA, and you can see his style
definitely
in both of them.
They both have little moments of surrealist horror in them that are like genuinely pretty bone chilling. Yeah. God, when you actually see them writing the Sorcerer name on the side of the truck, it's almost like a suiting up scene.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I have expected Roy Schneider to be like groovy,
Yeah.
It's so cool. I will give this an immortal. I think it's so underrated, and I love that it's had kind of the reappraisal that it's had. And right when Friedkin passed, there were a bunch of theaters in the city that were like eager to play this one. I'm so glad that this movie's kind of gotten the popularity that it always should have had. I love Sorcerer. I love Friedkin. I love this show. I love the listeners. I'm sure you do too.
Yes,
and
so do I.
I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. We will be back very soon. Look forward to next week where we go through Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon and After Hours. Or at least recording next week. It'll be out after that. But until then, keep watching movies, stay off of shaky bridges, and deuces.
Deuces.
Thank you.